Well, good evening and welcome. My name is Penny Wright, and on behalf of all of us at the Rogers Memorial Library, I'd like to welcome you to this Talking History evening. Tonight we'll be hearing from some longtime residents of the East End about what it was like during Prohibition. As always, we'd like to thank the Friends of the Rogers Memorial Library for their ongoing and generous support of our programs. And tonight we'd like to thank Nadja Potapchuk, Barbara Sawyers, Cynthia Coher, and Mimi Finger for making refreshments, which we hope you'll join us for after the program. Most of all, of course, we'd like to thank our three guests who consented to be here with us tonight to talk about a subject which may not have been that easy to talk about 50 or 60 years ago. Coincidentally, all three guests actually attended the Bridgehampton schools at the same time. And this is somewhat of a reunion for them. Okay. On the stroke of midnight on January 16th, 1920, America went dry. For the next 13 years, the 18th Amendment to the Constitution would specifically deny every citizen the right to buy or sell alcoholic drink. Prohibition incited Americans to bend or break the law by virtually any means possible. And many believe that during Prohibition, people drank all the more. Our three guests tonight are here to tell us stories about how the East End fared during those years.
How much they drank?
Pardon me?
How much they drank?
How much they drank. To my left is Bud Jones, a longtime resident of Flying Point who was born in Bridgehampton, moved to Southampton with his family where he finished high school, then, apart from 4 years spent in the Coast Guard, worked as a serviceman in the gas division of Lilco for 40 years. In 1941, he married the late Helen Burnett and had 3 children, all of whom reside in the East End. Mr. Jones is now retired. He enjoys golf, is active in the Presbyterian Church, and loves to fly airplanes since he got his student's license in 1996. We are very grateful to him for being here with us this evening. Next to Bud Jones is Dick Zimmer, a longtime resident of North Sea, who was born in Riverhead, spent several years upstate, and moved back to the East End in 1925. One of the interesting jobs Mr. Zimmer has had over the years was working as a projectionist in the old movie theater on Hill Street. And we're going to try to do another program some night about those early years of the theaters because it's so fascinating. Mr. Zimmer lived and worked in New York City for many years, and since his return to the East End has been active in the Elks Club and enjoys gardening around the home he shares with his wife Joan, who is in our audience tonight. Thank you so much for being here, Dick. Our last guest is someone who has very kindly agreed to be on several of our Talking History programs, and he's a man in great demand here on the East End, having spent over 50 years recording and predicting the weather here, and having recently collected his observations on weather and other interesting local lore in a book titled Winds of the Fish's Tail, which is a really wonderful book. Mr. Hendrickson grew up on the farm in which he still lives in Bridgehampton, where he makes his home with his wife Lillian, and for many years farmed actively and raised poultry and livestock for markets both domestic and foreign. He is an avid collector of Indian artifacts as well as antique firearms, and has lectured on these and other subjects extensively throughout the East End. Mr. Hendrickson has been honored for his work on behalf of the community many times, and once again we are very grateful to him for being here with us tonight. I'd like to start off, if we might, since all of you were relatively young in 1920, by asking each of you when you first became aware of Prohibition. What were the attitudes about Prohibition among the adults you knew, your parents, their friends, and the attitudes of the community in general? Would any of you like to speak to that?
Speaking for myself, don't recall that it was any special sort of an atmosphere that we just assumed that it was a natural thing. My parents didn't drink, and we knew of a few people in the neighborhood that did, but no significance.
Did they not drink because of Prohibition, or did they just simply never drink?
I think they just never drank. It was never anything of particular interest.
Right.
Until, I guess, well, shortly before the repeal of Prohibition, is really when I became that drinking was a social problem.
Right. How about you, Dick? Did your parents drink, or did your friends and family?
My father did drink. My mother never did. I didn't. Of course, I was young. I didn't drink at all. But a lot of the drinking, I think, was liquor that was made at home by different people, and it was more like a get-together on a Friday or a Saturday night where any of the liquor was consumed at that time.
Privately in homes?
Privately in homes. I mean, there wasn't any, I don't remember any places around here at that time where people got together, went to a club or anything like that. It was mostly social at home, or if it was a party or something like that. That's when you found the liquor.
Right. How about you, Dick? In your family?
Well, no one in the family drank, but we had nearby neighbors who we knew made it. It was conversation of certain accidents, or certain persons were in the bootlegging business, but nothing that bothered anyone local. You heard about it at Montauk or 3 Mile Harbor or Greenport or something like that, but it was only, as you've been told, that weekends people did have their get together, and most of it was homemade brew, and sometimes there were arguments, and it was all done, I think a lot of it, to make a buck. We live in a different atmosphere today. Everybody's got a car, and that was the Model Ts, and later the Model A's come out, and people still farmed with horses, and to get together or to make some and make a buck. Why, on the side, why, this is what they did, and today it's so much spoken of and written down as history, and of that period from the 20s into the 1933 when it was canceled and you could go and buy your liquor.
Was among the people that you knew, was it were people very secretive about drinking, or was it a generally acceptable thing to do? Even though your family may not have been drinkers, but was it something that people would whisper about? Was it pretty much out in the open among friends, or what were the attitudes about it?
Well, today we know it, oh, that was a speakeasy, or that was a roadhouse, or you have words, you have phrases. People didn't do it openly. hey, you know him down the street? He'll sell you a bottle. But it wasn't known much more than that, the local people. Remember, there was a lot fewer people then than there are today. And there were the ones that made it, and there were the ones, they drank some too, but they were making an extra buck.
I think wine was probably more dominant than hard liquor.
Yeah.
Most families, including my own, did make wine.
Did make wine.
But and I think that was the extent of it.
Would they have made their own wine before Prohibition, or would
Yeah.
they might have been producing wine beforehand? All right, I'd like to talk for just a few minutes about the clubs where liquor was, up to, where you could go and have a drink, because I know several of you have mentioned the location. Actually, one of the things that we talked about before doing this program was the fact that we're going to try not to name names. So, don't worry if you're one of the guilty parties in the audience. We're just interested really in hearing the stories. So without naming names, let's just talk about where some of the speakeasies or the roadhouses were located, because they're in buildings that are still standing, I think. Can you name it? Can you tell us where some of them were?
Right across from Frankenbach's, what was formerly Frankenbach's greenhouses, that is an antique shop now, I believe.
Which is near on Hampton Road,
Yeah.
Across from the firehouse.
Yeah. Also on Sagaba Turnpike, about where the nursery school or the what is it? A school.
Oh, there's a daycare center, I think.
Daycare center. The house set way back in the field, and that was very popular. And also on the Turnpike, just beyond. Before the railroad track on the right-hand side. That was
Yeah, where is that again?
in Bridgehampton.
In Bridgehampton.
Before the railroad track. I don't know the name. Narrow Lane. Narrow Lane that goes down along parallels the railroad. There's one there.
That was a place you could go.
Don't misunderstand me. Just because I know of all these.
You didn't go there. We know that. We'll find out more about you later. But they're not all innocent in this group. But we'll see who did what.
I have a couple here. well known. It was a place in Hampton Bays right next to the canal, just east of the canal.
Which is now?
It's some kind of a little restaurant and inn right now. It's been under several different names in the last. The other one was the Ambassador Inn in Quogue.
In Quogue.
That was a great place. Now, I can't name a name, but there was one place that's a stone's throw from here.
Can you tell us where it was?
It still is.
Okay.
The place is still there.
Okay.
Not the people.
Yeah.
Then there was a place in Hampton Bays, just also east of the canal, where Jackson's Marina is now, on the left side. There was a house there where you could buy liquor, and of course, Dick knows place in Bridgehampton, right across from the railroad station. It was called Nick's at that time. That is where you would find all the farmers after the day's work with all the pickup trucks used to be parked in front of the Nick's. That was a favorite watering hole. And the other place was a big place across from Otis Ford, down that road. I don't know what the road is, but that was a big place. They used to have entertainment there and all. And,
Was that in Quogue?
East
Quogue.
Quogue.
Now, in those days, it was called Jameson's. Now, I don't know. I just went by there the other day, and it's no longer there, but that was a great place.
What kind of entertainment would they have had there?
Well, they had a lot of dancing girls there.
Now, was it primarily men who went to these places?
Yes.
Primarily men.
Yeah.
And when people went there, was there someone at the door, sort of a bouncer, or, I mean, did you have to give your name so they made sure you weren't somebody from the authorities?
Well,
Joe sent me.
I was there only once.
You mean you were at Jameson's only
I
once?
don't believe it.
Oh, dear.
So women didn't go there and men did, and was there a bar? I mean, would you go in and get a seat?
No, they did have bars. They had tables, you know, where you sat down and you had a waitress, or most of the time, if it was a party of 3 or 4, you would buy a bottle and sit down, you know, and you would be served the glasses and everything else, and that's the way it was.
What kind of a selection was there on the menu or whatever? I mean, did you just
It was mostly
1 or 2 things that you could get?
Whiskey at
Mostly
that time.
whiskey.
Yeah.
How about you, Mr. Hendrickson? Can you think of any other places?
Oh, sure. There was one that's gone now that was very popular, probably the oldest around Bridgehampton, known as Parsons. It
Yes.
burnt down. That's
Yeah, I remember now.
And I guess that was open 7 days a week. Sunday probably supposed to be closed. I never went there. I was in there afterwards. There was a number of very unusual antiques in there, and it was in the process of being rented out. Then it was burnt down, and then between there, which was on the Bridgehampton-Sag Harbor Turnpike, that was one, and then before you hit the railroad track going to the harbor, there were 2 more. And then between Bridgehampton Monument and Long Wharf and Sag Harbor, I would say there was another 3 and maybe 4 more. Oh, yeah. And it was the thing of the day. I don't know whether they were closed up and then later reopened and like that. It was all done on the side. So many people did it. You couldn't be an honest cop. Everybody was in this. And to what point they were paid off or how much or what, I don't know, but I know it was very difficult because whenever you heard of a wreck or something like that, go up to Riverhead afterwards and there'd be 1 or 2 bottles of liquor as evidence. That's all they had, but there was probably 500 bottles on the truck. Who got them?
Right.
Well, and this was, but there were many places off on the side, people that made it and sold it on the side at a farmer's house. And you would go there on Saturday afternoon and sometimes on Sunday, and some of them bought it and sold it, some of them made it and sold it. And it was that of that time.
Let me ask you, before we leave this and move on a little bit, can you describe a liquor making operation of the variety that, you know, was at a farmer's place, how it happened?
Well, on the side they had their own still. Some of them made potato alcohol, which if it's made right I guess is vodka. Some of them made it out of corn, some of them made it out of rye. And there was times right in the heyday, a little bit towards the latter end, where they would buy alcohol and put in it.
Instead of
I
natural?
don't know the name, but I know people that became blind. Wood alcohol.
Yeah.
mixed.
Now, so they had a crop of some kind, either corn or...
Well, they raised the corn or they
potatoes.
bought it.
Right.
But,
And then sugar.
huh?
Sugar?
Sugar. Whatever's necessary.
Okay. I'm sorry?
You want a receipt?
I'm not looking for the recipe, but okay. And So a farmer might have a legal operation of a farm and do legitimate farming and then be making liquor on the side.
Yeah.
Right. Now, was the liquor consumed in these local speakeasies, was it generally imported from Canada, or was it homegrown, homemade liquor?
I think majority of that was
Yeah.
bootleg liquor. wasn't
That was
it?
bootleg
Bootleg
liquor.
liquor.
Okay.
The still, you asked about a still.
Yeah.
I saw it in operation once. They had this big pot on the stove, and the mash was in there. And then there was a copper tube that came out of that and had about 3 turns to it. Then it went into another, like a big tub, and there was cold water in that. And then the tube continued on to another pan. And when it was boiling in here, whatever the vapors and all were coming up through, it would cool in those tubes, go through the cooling process, and whatever was dripping into the pan, that was the alcohol, that was the drink.
I see.
I saw that operation.
Were there tremendous variations in quality of what was produced? Were there people who were known for producing very good alcohol and others not so much?
Well, I don't know anything about the quality or the kind, but you would just call it liquor, and some of them wanted whiskey, some of them wanted gin, and
Yeah.
one thing and another. But speaking of being made, one of the largest, it was written up in the New York papers, one of the largest stills on Long Island was just north of Bridgehampton. In what had been years ago the Forster farm, which had been sold, and the party rented the farm out to another party, and in that barn were 4 silos, and those silos had the mash and the fermentation taking place. And the government found out about it, and how, I don't know. We are told from the large shipments of sugar that was sent out from Brooklyn. And as kids in our 16, 18, we were sleigh riding up on the hills north of Bridgehampton, and one of the children that was sleigh riding with us, his father was a cop, and kiddingly we'd say, "Your old man wants to make a pinch. You smell that? They're making whiskey over there." Well, it was about 2 or 3 months later that was raided. They were producing 1,000 gallons of alcohol daily. The feds came in, and they smashed the beautiful deep well pump that any farmer would have given half his life to have, because it was a very expensive one. They couldn't afford it at that time, and of course when the federals come in, they just smashed it up. And with that, there were just thousands and thousands of brand new 1 gallon bright tin cans with a handle on, like you'd buy a gallon of turpentine or linseed oil in today, and that's what they put it in. I don't know what time of evening or night that they raided, but I know they caught 2 fellows. The other 2 fellows jumped out the north side of the farmhouse and ran through the woods to Noyak. But that, at that time, which was in the 1926, 1927, that was supposed to be at that time the largest still on Long Island. But there were others back in the woods. I know of a couple of potato houses that had a false section, and that's where they stored their liquor after they made it or after they bought it. But most of the local people made their own, and when you went to a speakeasy, why, you bought what they had, and that was something that was imported from Canada. And some came from the Middle West. Of course, Mexico imported it. We got it from all over. There was then, at that time, there was only a 3-mile limit. And it was all row of schooners and ships from Canada out there, and any time you wanted to row out there and come in, you could get whatever you wanted, as long as you had the money.
All right, let's talk about that a little bit. How did that operation work? Did the bootleggers, did the people delivering the contraband from Canada, get in touch with local people out here who own boats, and
Well, they had their own distributors, the people who brought it in.
I don't know how they contacted the fellows from Canada, but remember, this is a period after World War I, and the local fellows that were so engaged, they had boats far faster than the government had. And they had these Liberty engines out of World War I,
Yeah.
and they had fast boats, and they could, all the coves and the hollows and little harbors and creeks in the fork of eastern Long Island at some time or other had one of those fellows visiting.
They, remember when they chased that one boat around into Sag Harbor, and it laid there all day long, and it got away from the Coast Guard. The Coast Guard boat couldn't get in there because the water wasn't deep enough, and that boat laid in Sag Harbor all day long, and no one paid any attention to it. When the tide came out, they backed out, you know, and off they went somewhere with loaded to the hilt with liquor.
oh, really? Were the people who were waiting on the shore to unload, were they given a signal?
Oh, sure.
How were they signaled?
That was all arranged.
Lights?
All arranged, sure.
Lights. All right. I want to ask you how any of you became aware that there was money to be made by helping unload or transport liquor. Let's start with you, Bud Jones.
Well, in those days, $1 was hard to come by. I don't think, as I recall, that that influenced me too much. It was more the spirit of the chase that interested me. And as a matter of fact, a very good friend of mine, my very good buddy, his father was a bootlegger. And so I was privy to a lot of the things that was going on. However, that was on the local scene. His contact was someplace in Brooklyn, or he wasn't the principal involved. He did it for the people in Brooklyn. But they would recruit people like myself, or young people, and
Did you drive?
no. My efforts were strictly from getting the merchandise off the beach and onto the trucks, and away it went.
So you would be at the beach, and when a boat came in, you would help unload
That's correct.
and put it on the trucks, and away it went?
Yeah, that's correct. The one I only experienced it twice, and I didn't get any pay, so that was the end of it.
Were you
I found out that the shipment between here and New York was stopped, and they lost the whole shipment. And the story that I got was that we didn't get paid, so you don't get paid.
Oh, I see.
So that was the end of my
That was the
career.
end. How about you, Dick?
Well, I, through a friend of mine, I was told how to, called me up one time and said, do you want to make a few extra dollars? And I said, doing what? He said, unloading a boat. And I said, unloading a boat? I said, where are we going to unload it? He says, in Amagansett. He said, it's good money. I said, oh, wonderful, you know. So I volunteered to go, and where I was told to go in Amagansett.
Did you drive?
Yeah, I drove my car.
You had your car, right.
Yeah. I went over to just before you get to Heather Hill State Park. And there I met another group of men. And from there we walked across to the dunes. And once we got over there, the boat was already laying there. And they had all these dories, and they were bringing the liquor in. And there must have been, well, I'd say maybe 30 or 40 different men. And it was just a whole line from the beach, and you passed on. And there was this big hollow like in the dune. And we just stacked it all in there, and they got a lot of beach grass and seaweed and stuff and covered it all up. And that was it. That's all you had to do. And what happened to it from there on, the next day, where it went to, we didn't know.
You didn't know.
The basic thing, you know, when you handled anything like that, was you had a zipper across your mouth. You didn't know who the guy was or who the payoff man was. I was involved with transporting and carrying it about, I'd say about 5, 6 times. And I never knew who the man was that was paying off, or, but he was there.
How much were you paid for unloading from the boat to the shore?
Well, I remember $10, which was a lot of money.
If you were one of many people doing it, there must have been a lot of money changing hands in one operation.
Oh, there was.
So that was it.
And how about taking it into New York? Tell us about that. Did you do it in your car?
I did it. Yeah, I did it in my car. For that matter, I have a picture of my car that the car. I had a Chrysler Roadster. I took the rumble seat out and put extra heavy springs in it. And I was able to put 10 cases of Golden Wedding into it. And I got $5 a case for transporting it from here to Brooklyn. And that was big. As Bud said, that was big money in those days.
Right.
As we were discussing before, gasoline was 12 cents a gallon. So
$50 went a long way.
Oh God, it sure did.
Did you bring something to show here?
Well, so I brought one, and thanks to Mary Gouldy for loaning me this. This is a bottle of Golden Wedding. That's what it looked like. Now, this is quite a peculiar thing. Now, we don't know how this came, but on here, it says December 1924. And here it says, for medical purposes only, prized by physician and so on and so forth, over 50 years. Now, this is it. Now, whether this was duplicated in Canada, but this was the size of the packages. And they were packed 24, and they were packed in a burlap bag sewn around, you know, so that's the way it was transported.
That's great.
Mary Gouldy was generous enough to let me this. Her father found this.
Looks like somebody took a couple of nips out of that.
Yeah, somebody did take a couple of nips. Mary, you sure you didn't have this?
I've never opened it.
What were you going to say, Bud? Did you have a comment?
I was just, in respect in regard to the transporting of the liquor across the beach. One night we were working on the beach, and it was rather foggy. The ship or the boat that was delivering the merchandise was laying offshore, and we had some local fishermen that could handle the surf and dories going back and forth to the boat offshore. And for some reason, the man in charge of our operation, he became aware that everything wasn't just the way he thought it should be. So he had a lantern, and he started running up and down the beach with this red lantern to tell the dories not to come on the beach. And so they moved offshore, and everything quieted down. Consequently, we didn't know where the fellows in the dories were, whether they were sailing around the Atlantic someplace. And it was about a week later we found out that they had gone on board the mother boat offshore, and they deposited them in New Jersey. And that's the only way they had to get a car and come back.
Oh my goodness.
It was close.
There must have been a lot of close calls.
I tell you another incident that I had. I was given a truck to drive to Montauk to Fort Pond Bay to pick up some liquor. And here's another story. Just before you get to Heather Hill State Park, there's a road that goes off to the left, and it goes through the hills. And at that time, all there were just 2 ruts in the road. And you put the wheels of the truck in that, and you didn't have to have lights or steer it or anything. You just, it knew the way all the way down to Fort Pond Bay. We got down there, I turned the truck around, and I was supposed to wait for a signal. I turned it around, you know, and I'm sitting in the truck waiting, and all of a sudden this big spotlight comes on, you know.
From the water.
From the water, you know, and the next thing you know, it's pap, 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 a machine gun goes off, you know. Of course, when I heard the pop, 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 I dove for a big pile of rocks, and I don't think I took 3 breaths, you know, the whole 10 minutes it seemed to me. I laid there in this pile of rocks. When the light went off, I crawled on my hands and knees into the truck, pushed the clutch in, turned the ignition on, put it in gear, and let the clutch out with my hand so it started right out. And believe me, I didn't waste any time getting out of there in a hurry.
So you did it from the floor?
From the
You
floor.
couldn't see where you were going?
Well, once I got a little further away, you know, then
Right.
I stopped it, you know,
Right.
and sat behind the wheel.
Was that enough to scare you?
Well, the money, you weren't scared that easily because I did make a couple of more trips to New York. We put whoever truck it was. I worked for a sign painter here on Moses Lane, and when he first got his new Model A truck, and he kind of dabbled in liquor at that time. So I knew where to get it, and what we did was put 10 cases of liquor in the middle of the truck, and then we put potatoes, bushels of potatoes, or sacks of potatoes all around, and on top of it we put crates of cauliflower on top of it, and you drove into New York that way. And the one and only time that I got stopped, just as I was getting into Bayshore, and before you get into Bayshore, the Wrigley estate was right there on the left side, and that's where they pulled me over. But somehow they took 2 crates of cauliflower off the truck, you know, and they said, "Oh, he doesn't have anything," and they let me go. So that was the great thing, you know, that I was able to get away with. Although a lot of the guys who did the trucking were warned by the state police at that time that if the revenue people stopped you, make sure when they unload your load looking for liquor that they reload all your merchandise that you're carrying. Otherwise, you're going to be stuck on alongside the road with maybe 100 bags of potatoes or 100 crates of cauliflower, and you have to lug it back onto the truck.
Right. A couple of you mentioned that the people you were most afraid of were the revenue agents, not the local police, not the Coast Guard.
No.
Can you talk about that a little bit? Were the local police, some of them,
Yes.
you know, gaining financially by?
Yes, they were gaining financially, yes. Quite a few, I would say quite a number of them had a little interest in it.
How about the Coast Guard?
The Coast Guard they were pretty tough, and the experiences that I had, you know, one experience with them, where we unloaded also in Amagansett, and we just got through unloading I don't know how many cases at that time, and all of a sudden there were about 15 Coast Guardsmen with lights. Okay, boys, just stay where you are, and somebody came up to talk to them, and that was it. I don't know what happened, whether they got paid off or not, but I know that they were there, and they had us all lined up.
I think the higher-ups, or the captain and the first mate and the higher-ups in the stations were being taken care of. I don't think the enlisted people were.
What was the penalty if you were caught? Did people go to jail, or were they fined? What happened to them?
I guess a lot of them were just fined, weren't they, Bud?
I think so. I don't
remember anybody going to jail for it.
I don't either.
I think the larger ones that were in it with thousands and thousands of dollars. I know one party that was put in jail, and later was let go, but was in jail, and then he had made thousands of dollars, thousands of them, and he was a poor man at the end of probation. Another party that I knew of left, and I heard that he went to Canada. He was in it, quite large. And then somebody later said he was killed. And these were people with speedboats, big trucks, and not handling $20,000 or $40,000 worth of liquor. They were large operators. Of course, it all came into being what was the gangsters. This was the 20s. And we didn't realize it at the time because we were just the local young men around here, and it was a everyday sort of thing that, oh, he's trucking his liquor in, or one fella that had a large truck, enclosed truck, could carry 4 or 5 horses. He had a false bottom in that truck, and he had the false bottom lined with cases of liquor. And as a fellow in my almost early 20s, they say, oh, he's carried that horse back and forth to New York, he's going to die. Same horse, but that's how he got into the city. Whether he ever got caught or not, I don't know. But there were people that made some money, and there were people that went to jail. But they were the larger operators.
But there were a lot of stills. They were all through the North Woods here. Oh, there was almost, if you varied off 114 or the main roads, there were always little roads cut in, all angles over there. I know one time in 1929 when my buddy his father just bought him a new Chevy coupe. And it was a Sunday, and we were riding around. We were leaving Sag Harbor on 114 going towards East Hampton. Well, about a mile before we got to East Hampton, we saw this little road, you know, and he says, let's see what's down there. So we drove off the main road, and I don't think we were in there 1,000 feet. And all of a sudden, he looked at his radiator. In those days, they had the heat gauge, you know, on top of the radiator. And the water was boiling, you know. So he said, oh boy, he says, you need water. He said, let's see, where can we get any water? So we stopped the car, and we were looking through the woods, and we saw this, what looked like a chicken coop. So he said, well, maybe there's a pan or something, you know, we can get some water. So we walked up to the thing, you know, and all the windows had burlapping inside, but chicken wire on the outside. And he said, well, let's see if we can find out how we can see anything. So through the chicken wire, we parted some of the burlap, and when we looked in there, and all there were these nice-looking 5-gallon cans all lined up all over the place. And believe me, that thing was, that car was boiling hot because we went out of there so fast.
Right.
Because you always were afraid that somebody might take you for a hijacker.
Right.
And you're liable to meet your doom right there.
Right. They were pretty rough on people who did that, weren't they?
Oh boy,
I think I heard a story, or maybe one of you told me about someone who was caught who was more or less branded.
That's right.
Yes.
Can you tell us about that?
Do you remember this story?
I do. Yeah, go ahead. You tell it.
Well, I don't know whether how you know, but I heard that he was one of the hijackers, and two of them, yeah, and they sold some liquor from the bootleggers, and they were very unfortunate because they were caught, and they wouldn't tell them, you know, where the liquor, where they had the liquor hidden. So what they did is they took these two fellas in the woods to some shack that they had. They built a fire there, and then they had one of those old-fashioned potato mashers, and they heated that, and they branded the bottom of their feet with this. They didn't play potsy in those days. If you crossed them up, you know, you paid for it. Is that the way you heard it?
Yeah. That was the worst part of the whole thing. Then the mobs got control, and they started playing pretty heavy, and people were getting hurt. Yeah. And I think that's really what brought the prohibition, the repeal back, why repealed became, they did it. I personally have some misgivings about the repeal of prohibition. Granted, prior to the repeal, there were people were hurt, but since the repeal, there's been, as we all know, there's been thousands, probably millions of families disturbed, ruined, families of just absolutely disintegrated because of liquor. I agree that during the Prohibition days, there were mass murders, and we couldn't tolerate that. I do at times wonder whether it was a smart thing to do.
It seems as though people weren't going to stop drinking, though, were they?
No, that's true.
Dick, did your family know about your activities? What did you do with your money? You must have been kind of a wealthy guy.
You know what I used to do with my money?
Wine, women, and song.
No, I used to hide it. I used to hide it because I was afraid to bring it home because my mother would kill me. So I used to we had a garage, and there was the shingles at that time, wood shingles. In between the shingles and the lat that was in there, I used to roll up money and stick it all in there and take it out a little bit at a time. Now, when you asked about wine before, you know, my mother, God bless her, my mother made some of the best wine. And she made it out of almost anything and everything. Rhubarb, the best one that she made, now, as I said before, I didn't drink. I didn't drink till I was 28 years old. But my mother used to, it was a big, we had a big family, and my mother used to can a lot of peaches. And what she would do is take the peel and the pit, and she would make wine out of this. And I know friends of my father who used to come over there, and they'd take about 2 drinks of that stuff, you know, and that would almost knock them from the roof. It was so powerful. But she used to make strawberry wine, elderberry wine, cherry, wild cherry, dandelion. Mom was a professor, you know, as far as making wine.
Did she enjoy it also?
Oh no, Mom, no. I think she'd take a sip once in a while, but she never drank. No, I don't remember Mom drinking at all.
Now, in those days, wasn't there the Women's Christian Temperance Union? Wasn't there a branch out here? Or?
I think so, but
Because the other day I was talking with a couple of women, Edna Griffin and Chick Schaefer, who were Ellistons, and I think they mentioned that when they were young, they went to some meetings. They were you know, pretty young, and I think they remember being taken to some meetings. But I assume that it was mostly Women's Christian Temperance Union. Do any of you know any stories about that?
I don't remember any stories about the women, not where you read about it, where they raided some places, you know, where the men gathered, you know, for drinking parties. But I don't remember anything around here like that. I think most of them were too busy tending the family farms and all.
Here we go.
We've got another bottle.
Is it the same?
same golden
It's the
one.
same, but
golden
This is different.
Oh, is it?
Is it?
you wasn't supposed to drink. Well, you did, and you could buy it. Where could you buy it? You bought it at the drugstore. Medicinal purposes. Now this is Kentucky made, not Canadian, Kentucky. The label on this on one side is cracked. On the other side, it has never been opened. For medicinal purposes only, prescribed by practicing physicians as a stimulant and tonic for over 50 years. This is that was the only place you could buy it. I was thinking a lot about this meeting tonight, and if I may, I have a few things here that will just take a minute. I'd like to read them to you. It was the period mainly after World War I and into the 20s and early 30s that we ought to talk about. This was when no one could buy, at least not supposed to, whiskey, wine, champagne, or rum. It was illegal. Whiskey was sold only through the drugstore as a medicine. What developed in that short time was rum running, bootlegging, and hijacking. All this was illegal. Much home brew was made from corn, rye, potatoes, and some was poisonous potencies because they wanted to make more money, and they took regular denatured alcohol and mixed it. Several became blind from the wrong kind of alcohol. Lifestyle became faster. This is in the 20s, what we read about today, with the cars and the rum running. In the 20s, we had speakeasies, roadhouses, booze, and bathtub gin. Not to forget a dance, the Charleston, flappers, shorter skirts, and fast cars. World War II ace, Eddie Rickenbacker. They made a car in the 20s called the Rickenbacker automobile. Remember the Cord?
Yes.
And the Auburn car right on the corner of Windmill Lane and Hill Street?
Yeah.
There used to be one of each right there in the window.
Yeah.
Ending, I think, in 1933, we now look back at those days that we call the Roaring Twenties. Speedboats faster than the Coast Guard, trucks with false cargoes, much nighttime commerce with accidents and shootings. And what came was the big gangsters and the Thompson submachine guns. Rum was $1.50 a quart. The best scotch was $4.50 a quart. American-made golden wedding, supposed to have been in wood vat for 10 years. $2 a pint. 3 pints for $5. Now, there was a little story. I got this out of one of Time magazines. Mother makes brandy from cherries. Pop distills whiskey and gin. Sister sells wine from the grapes on our vine. Good grief, how the money rolls in. Now, that was the days when they started in, and I'm not going to make any names, but you know, over the years, I've always collected guns. Right here in Southampton, one of your wealthy people who does not live anymore. Dick, come on over, I got some guns I want to sell. Well, he did have a regular deer hunting rifle and a couple other things that I bought. And he says, you deal in pistols? I said, yes, I have a state license for pistols. Come on upstairs. And upstairs, there in the bathroom closet, on a door that you opened up, was 2 German Lugers and 2 Colt automatic pistols. I said, you got a permit? No. Well, I said, I can't have them. I said, you take them down to Chief of Police, and if he clears them, I can get them registered. That's the only way. Hey, got something else. The whole medicine cabinet moves. Out comes a practically brand new Thompson submachine gun. Right, Southampton. And it was all over. I know one house on Leacock's Bay, up on the 3rd floor, which we call an attic. There was a machine gun. Looked out over Mecox Bay and the ocean and the inlet.
Oh, wow.
And they were all around. Another party, we stored their car for them. They had their place. They bought it from the party that ran Star Island. Now, Star Island was about as wild as you can get. And when the Federals were going to raid, they had people on the main highway back in East Ham and Amagansett would call them up and say, there's a group coming down. All the gambling wheels and tables were folded up and put down solid, packed away. Come down, there was nothing. But there was many a cargo of all kinds of alcoholic beverages that came in. Some were caught. I went in one chicken house in about 1926 up in the woods. And that chicken house was owned originally. He had a windmill there, a windmill, and that chicken house had a double floor. The floor was made out of railroad ties, covered with straw. There was no chickens in it at the time, but you went around the back and cleared the brush out, and then you could go into this 6-foot-high cellar. And that's where he would store his cargo of liquor. He was caught, he was put in jail, he was out. Later, several years later, he went back into business again and he got caught. But there were just so many things. Very few people that I know of around here got caught, but I know of one load that was unloaded off of the ocean at Sagaponack. Came up early in the morning, about daylight, and turned from Sag Road onto Montauk Highway where the stoplight is today. And on that right-hand side of the road, the north side, they didn't have a culvert there. It was just a great big ditch about this deep, about that wide, and the water that came down the road and from the Montauk Highway and the Sag Harbor Road, washed in there, went into Sag Swamp or Poxy Bog, slipped on the ice or frost on the road and upset. The truck caught fire. Of course, it had a full tank of gas, headed for New York. The one fellow got out, the other fellow was jammed in there, and a very good friend of mine, as old as my father, told me that morning when he woke up with this man screaming, the man was left in the truck to burn up. I went to school that morning, and I got halfway down Lumber Lane, and here comes one of the parties in with his car and grabbing cases out of the back of his car and running in the house and come back, get in the car and go ahead down there again. Then I heard afterwards that everybody going along the road to work, they'd stop and take 1 or 2 or 3 cases, put it in the back of their car, go back to get another case, somebody swiped it out of their car and put it in their car, and this is what went on. But that was a terrible thing. The other man ran through the woods toward the harbor. But there were episodes. One party was in the liquor business, and he shot the Ernest boy from East Hampton, who was riding with a Bridgehampton girl at the time down on Stony Hill Road. They had nothing to do with the liquor business or anything like that. It was just misidentification. He was sent. They had a big trial in Riverhead. You talk about hard business and gangs. His henchmen came to the jury people at home to find him innocent. I'm going to kill your daughter. Man got off free for killing an innocent high school boy. I know the man very well. He worked on the farm for quite a years, man with a family. And there were many episodes that happened, and a lot more we don't know.
Do any of you have any questions you'd like to ask, or stories? Actually, I think Ted Schrader had a story.
Just saying, they do ask about the WCTU.
Yes.
He told me that my Aunt Carrie Wild was having a meeting. They had a house on the Borden Square, north of Borden Square there. They were having a meeting at WCTU, and my mother and Carolyn Fordham, or Carolyn Wild, used to sneak in when the ladies were in the parlor, and they'd go to the piano, and they'd beat out quick little brown jug and then run like heck. You know? So, the word WCTU meetings around. He said, yeah, my grandmother belonged to that.
Mm-hmm.
She was dense on liquor, but she did finally say that, well, the medicinal
The same thing.
Were there drugstores in town that you could buy liquor in?
That I know of. No. There wasn't any. I never knew that they sold it in drugstores.
This is
I was wondering if they sold it in drugstores.
This is my Chrysler Roadster that I used to run.
Apparently.
Yes.
Yeah, my dad ran a taxi business on Windmill Lane. Windmill Lane, just this side, other side of Hill Street, that closed up in 1932. And one time, he had about 6, 7 taxis for taxi. And he got a call one night late, he had to go out and pick up somebody down in Montauk. And when he got there, why, they let him know in uncertain terms that he was to load the back of his taxi with some crates, and because apparently their trucks didn't come in, and he had to go all the way to New York, and he could not refuse them. It was just, it would have been bad business, and I know he had to do that once, and he never went down to Montauk with his taxis again. You know, because you could get bad,
Right,
bad problems.
right.
You remember when they shot the Watermill garage out the windows?
No.
Yeah, for the machine gun.
Yeah.
Remember?
I remember that.
Yeah, that was another one.
What happened there?
The Watermill Garage, that was quite a place, a hangout, you know, for hijackers. And the bootleggers heard about it, and one night they came out there and they riddled all the plate glass windows with machine gun fire.
Mummy Corrigan's place?
No, this is Bill Lowney's. Right by the bank.
Did you have a question?
No. You were talking
comment.
about speakeasies earlier. There was one in the basement of the Swank building, which is almost directly across from the Village Hall where the local police department is located.
In the basement?
In the basement.
Henry, what were you going to say?
I was going to say, that Bill Loney, Jim McGee was in that barn that night. Do you know that?
No, I didn't know that.
He heaved himself up and hung off the rafter because with the submachine gun, they went completely around that building, and they figured there was no way that any person that was standing there, because I think they went from about 4 feet to 6 feet, that they would get him. And he did survive that by hanging up in the rafter.
Is that right?
Was it?
I never knew that.
I mean, Jim told me that.
Yes, Mr. Bronstein, is that you?
I don't know if the existing Shinnecock Reservation then was what it is now, but were the Indian lands involved in any way in the...
Not that I ever heard. I never heard that they were.
No.
Anyway.
It's pretty much the same as it was in those days.
Yes.
Shelter Island would seem to be a natural place for the liquor to come in. Were there any...
That's too hard to get off.
There was the Noyak Casino.
Yeah.
That was a very popular place.
McNally's.
McNally's.
Right.
And over Greenport, one of the restaurants there that's on spiles, docking, and they would bring the speedboat right in at low water, low tide, under that, and take it right up through a door right into the building. Nobody ever knew the boat was there. And there were many, many things that took place like that. It's hard to say if there's any areas where there wasn't an episode. Down to Promised Land at the fish processing plant for bunkers. They came in with there very openly on one of the old docks, and they unloaded it, set it right up on the dock, so full, too much weight. The old stock collapsed and all these cases of liquor went down. And if you ever saw guys with clam rakes clamming, they were clamming in Napeague Harbor for not clams.
Well, then there was a story during the Lindbergh kidnapping.
Yeah,
that somebody said that the baby was being held at the Montauk Hotel in Montauk. And of course the owner of the Montauk Hotel, he had a beautiful home there, and he of course was very big in liquor. And he had lots of liquor stored in his cellar. Well, when they heard that the FBI was coming out to Montauk to search the place, all that liquor was taken out that day and all dumped into Fort Pond Bay. Well, when the FBI didn't come out to search the place, everybody the next day was out there with boats trying to retrieve all that liquor that was down in there.
Yes.
With the involvement of the mob and gangsters, and some of you described them coming into this area, has there been any long-term influence of mobsters, gangsters in the East End?
No.
We hope not.
Not that we're aware of, anyway.
No.
Yes.
Yes, special doctor's note to buy whiskey at the pharmacy, or can anyone go in there and buy a bottle of that stuff?
No, maybe you had to have a doctor's prescription. I never got that sick that I had to buy a bottle.
Would doctors give them out pretty freely to let friends?
I don't know. I don't know. It's on the label. And
Yes.
How long did it take to drive from out here to, say, Brooklyn?
Well, there wasn't any traffic lights at that time, and the road was wide open. It took you about an hour and 3/4 because you had nothing in your way. You just went.
the old South Shore, or Montauk Highway.
Yeah. You took Montauk Highway as far as, it was either Lynbrook or Valley Stream, and then it became Merrick Road. And you took Merrick Road into Conduit Avenue, and Conduit Avenue into Pennsylvania Avenue, and then into where the markets were.
Yes.
Did any of you fellows ever hear of the Black Duck boat?
Yeah.
What?
Had 3 Liberties in it. It was one of the famous rum runner boats, and it had a steel transom in it behind the wood, and also had a steel unit that would come up hydraulically when the Coast Guard was shooting at them to protect them. And they never did shoot that boat down, but they did corner it, and they found it empty. They finally got the boat.
Well, that was the Liberty.
That had 3 Liberty engines.
That was Dutch Schultz's boat.
That's right.
They sunk it off of New London.
That's correct.
Yeah.
The government was chasing one of the rum runners down off Amagansett, and they run that Eagle boat. The Coast Guard ashore. You got too shallow of water, and it's, I guess it's still up on their beach. I don't know. They took it up for scrap in World War II.
The canal was an ex-rum runner, and that had big Chrysler engines in it. He'd take charters out on one engine because he couldn't afford to run the other one. 14 gas tanks in that boat. 52 foot long.
Yes.
Why was it so popular on the East End, or was it just the whole Long Island? I mean, there's all kinds of North Shore, Port Jefferson, South Shore. Why was the Eastern End seems to be?
They were from Maine to Florida.
Really? The whole coast?
According to history book, they were lined up about 3 miles, then later they got a 10-mile limit, a 12 miles. But they would, this is money you're talking about.
Really?
Yeah, it was.
Yes, Mr. Neighbors.
Hey, Penny, when I was had the Agro-American Products plant in Sag Harbor in the 60s, some of my men who were born and raised in Sag Harbor were talking one day about what you're talking about here, and about some hilarious instances, and about some of the baymen that were participating in this rum running business. And on one occasion, on one of these high-speed boats, they made it through the shallow water you gentlemen talked about, but there was a revenue in close pursuit that apparently didn't know the inlet well enough. It ran aground, and apparently the boat developed a pretty good sized hole in the bottom and stayed there for several days. They thought that was a real funny experience.
Do you remember when Prohibition was repealed? I'm sure you do. You were older then. And
30.
Yeah,
Sure.
33.
what was that like? Was there a lot of celebrating, or I mean,
Things quieted down.
things quieted down?
That's when I quit. I left here and went to New York.
A great many of the speakeasies closed up because apparently they were much more lucrative while,
While they were forbidden.
yeah.
Why did we get prohibition? What was the impetus?
Well, I guess I thought that,
Was it Carrie Nation with a hatchet beating up the saloons? Many a family man would, I guess, come home drunk or beat his wife up. It was family trouble, and was getting just out of hand too far. And of course, probably Prohibition went too far the other way. But my father, who was raised in Jamaica, they were farm folk down there, and he said going to Jamaica High School in the morning, so now this is 8 o'clock, along where the saloons were, the man would be sweeping out the garbage, stuff into the street, and once in a while there'd be a half-drunk man laying on the sidewalk. My father was a teetotaler. He never touched it, never wine, beer, and anything. And he was really against it. I'll tell you a very interesting article one time, episode that happened. We had a dairy. Dad had 30 head of milkers. And this one time, one of the cows got off a feed, later got quite sick, and Dad called Mr. Bennett, the veterinary from East Hampton, over, and he said, check this cow over. What can we do? It's a good milker. We got to say that. And they tested it with one thing and another for a few days. Dr. Bennett says, I want you to get a pint of whiskey and give it to that cow. So he said, I think that's about the only thing that'll save her. Try it. Oh my goodness. I'm not going to do that. Well, he says, if you want to save the cow, you better get it. Well, he says, you know where you can get it? Well, not in the hedge and like that. Finally, Dad went over to buy the pint of liquor, and the lady didn't want to sell it to him. No, Freddie pinch, squeal on her. Said no, he wanted it for a cow, and finally Pop convinced her that it was okay. He wanted it for the cow. Got the pint of whiskey, come home. Cow died. That's a true one.
That's good. Well, I'm sure that we'll all think of a lot of questions after we end here, but I want to really thank the three of you so much for coming in to be with us tonight.
Our pleasure.
I want to thank you all for coming. And I hope you'll stay for a few minutes and come next door and have some cookies and punch.
I would say you may come up and look at this bottle and container if you wish, but please don't handle it. Not that you're going to drop it and break it.